assigned to the British 30th Corps with the British 40th, no, the British 50th making a landing.
Recently, while tidying up the old attic of the Brentwood house, James Garner's family accidentally discovered a dusty wooden box with a rusted lock. Inside was an old leather notebook with a faint inscription notes, Arizona, 1968. They thought it was just a few work notes from the days of filming Support Your Local Sheriff. But when they opened it, the first pages left the whole family in shock. According to his daughter, Gigi Garner, it wasn't just a diary anymore. It was a confession that had never been spoken aloud. Inside, James wrote about Jack Elam, his colleague, his friend, and perhaps the missing piece he carried with him all his life. Lines such as, "That night only the two of us understood each other," or "Silence is also a way to love," stirred deep emotions. In the end, within that notebook, hidden for nearly half a century, what did James Garner confess that he couldn't bring himself to say while he was alive? And to find the answer, we must go back to 1968 to the sun-drenched, dusty deserts of Arizona, where two men met for the very first time. The relationship between James Garner and Jack Elam. From colleagues to kindred spirits. The first pages of James Garner's leather-bound notebook, discovered after his death at his Brentwood home, begin with a story that seemed almost ordinary. A scorching afternoon at Old Tucson Studios, Arizona in 1968. It was the first day of filming for Support Your Local Sheriff, a light-hearted Western comedy backed by Warner Brothers. At the time, Garner was already an A-list star, Hollywood's model, leading man, clean-cut, calm professional, and always punctual. His new co-star Jack Elam, however, was the complete opposite. In his notes, Garner wrote, "Jack showed up nearly an hour late, shirt untucked, hair a mess, shoes still muddy. He looked around, grinned at everyone, and asked me, 'Got a light?' I remember the heat was unbearable, everyone sweating buckets, and there he was, cool as if the sun didn't touch him." That was their first meeting. No one could have guessed that the two would go on to become not only one of cinema's most iconic duos, but lifelong companions. Elam had long been Hollywood's professional villain. He'd played dozens of bit parts, from the drunken outlaw in Gunfight at the OK Corral to the eccentric assassin in Once Upon a Time in the West. His sharp features and off-centered eye, injured in childhood, made him typecast as rough, dangerous men. People feared him, yet couldn't look away. On the set of Support Your Local Sheriff, Elam might have been a supporting actor, but his personality was anything but secondary. He constantly interrupted. The director improvised his own lines and often disappeared for a cigarette mid-shoot. Director Burt Kennedy, infamous for his temper, nearly lost patience. A lighting technician later told the Tucson Citizen that during the first week, Kennedy almost fired Elam for messing up lines and causing chaos on set. What few knew was that Garner, sitting in his dressing room at the time, overheard the argument. Garner recalled, "I don't know what came over me. I walked straight onto the set and told Burt, 'If Jack goes, I go. He's unpredictable, sure, but that's what'll make people remember this movie.' Burt just stared, then said, 'Your call.'" The incident spread quickly. A week later, Variety ran a short piece, "James Garner intervenes to save supporting actor." Such loyalty was rare in Hollywood, where most stars cared only for their own image. Garner later wrote, "I didn't have a reason. It was instinct. I saw something real in him, someone who didn't pretend to be liked." From that day, their friendship began to grow. Between takes, Garner and Elam shared coffee, joked about grumpy directors, and complained about the Arizona heat hot enough to make the rocks explode. Garner noted that Elam didn't mingle much, rarely went to parties, but always had a one-liner that made everyone laugh. Over time, an odd trust formed, one that didn't need many words. When Support Your Local Sheriff hit theaters in March 1969, it became an unexpected hit, grossing over $14 million, a big number for the time. The Los Angeles Times praised. The film's charm lies in the chemistry between Garner and Elam, two opposites who somehow fit perfectly. At the Chinese theater premiere, photographers caught Garner with his arm around Elam, laughing heartily. When a reporter joked, "You two look more like brothers than co-stars," Garner smiled. "Maybe we are." After the success, Warner Brothers quickly greenlit a sequel, Support Your Local Gunfighter 1971. Garner insisted Elam be cast again. The studio resisted, claiming Elam had no box office draw, but Garner stood firm. "No Jack, no me." They relented. Yet the reunion wasn't smooth. Journalist Harold Stern of the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner wrote that the two had a heated clash over script and performance. Crew members remembered shouting matches in the makeup room, at times so intense they feared it would turn physical. Garner admitted in his journal, "We did argue, but not about acting. I told Jack to cut back on the drinking. He said, 'Jim, don't tell me how to live.' I stormed out. The next morning he brought me coffee and said, 'I overdid it last night.' I couldn't stay mad at him. Their bond was strange that way. The more they fought, the closer they grew. On set, they were so in sync they barely needed direction. In behind-the-scenes photos by Tom Kelly, the two are always side by side, laughing while the crew bustled around them." A crew member told KTLA Los Angeles, "They were inseparable. Even in 115-degree heat, they'd go play golf together, then come back and shoot like nothing happened." By 1982, during an Entertainment Tonight interview, when asked, "Who do you trust most among actors?" Garner simply smiled and said, "Jack Elam. He never pretends." The answer stunned many, as by then, Elam had retired to Oregon, living quietly, while Garner remained a major star. Over the years, rumors swirled about their unusual connection. Some claimed their friendship was a publicity trick to promote their films. Others said Garner owed Jack a great personal debt. People Weekly even ran a 1973 feature titled "James Garner and Jack Elam Friends or Rivals," which read they argue constantly, but can't seem to stay apart for more than a week. Garner never commented publicly, but in his notebook, he left a single poignant line. "Between two men, sometimes a look says everything." From a dusty Arizona film set, two men from opposite ends of Hollywood, one a polished leading man, the other a misunderstood villain, had become true kindred spirits. They shared the highs of fame, the weight of silence, and a loyalty rare in their world. Yet, as Garner later hinted, things began to change when Jack's past started to resurface like a wave pulling us both into a storm neither of us saw coming. In the following pages, Garner began detailing the scandals, rumors, and untold corners of Jack Elam's life, of a man he described as complex, lonely, and so real it frightened people. The Scandals of Jack Elam, and the words, James Garner never spoke aloud. The middle section of James Garner's leather notebook is the one that has caused the most discussion. Across those pages, sentences are crossed out, rewritten in different inks, as if he wanted to confess but feared being misunderstood. Garner didn't try to turn Jack Elam into a legend. He described him as a real man, complicated, volatile, celebrated for his talent, and infamous for everything that happened when the cameras stopped rolling. Jack Elam was born in 1920 in Miami, Arizona, into a family dirt poor during the Great Depression. At age 12, he lost sight in his left eye after being stabbed by a pencil during a Boy Scouts meeting. Years later, Hollywood twisted that childhood mishap into a darker myth to sell headlines. Life magazine claimed he was injured in a bar fight in Phoenix, while Movieland called him Hollywood's reformed tough guy. Garner wrote, "People love a good story. Jack once told me they could write whatever they wanted as long as his name stayed in print. But deep down, he hated being branded a thug. That accident was a kid's foolish joke, not violence. Ironically, that crooked eye became his calling card." In the 1950s and 1960s, Hollywood adored villains with unusual faces, and Jack Elam was perfect. He appeared in over 70 films from Gunfight at the OK Corral to Once Upon a Time in the West. But with the talent came a reputation impossible to work with, hot-tempered, uncontrollable. Garner recalled that Elam could lose his temper if a director asked for more than 3 takes. During a 1957 press junket for Gunfight at the OK Corral, Elam threw a director's chair across the floor when a reporter interrupted him. A behind-the-scenes tape reprinted by Variety in 1962 showed Elam arguing with a production assistant simply because he'd been told to change shirts to avoid clashing with a co-star. Jack burned like fire, Garner wrote. He couldn't stand being told he was wrong. But if someone was treated unfairly, he'd be the first to defend them. By the 1960s, Elam was known not only for his roles, but for his drinking. Journalist Harold Stern of the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner wrote Jack Elam could be found at the Formosa Cafe on Hollywood Boulevard almost every Friday drinking whiskey until staff had to escort him out. Once on the set of The Way West 1967, he was detained by security for fighting with actor Keenan Wynn, who'd made a joke about his bad eye. Garner wrote, "When I got there, Jack was sitting on the steps, face swollen, knuckles bleeding. I asked what happened. He said, 'Just teaching him some manners.'" For all his fury, Elam was a deeply lonely man. Garner noted that although he was often invited to parties with stars like John Wayne Kirk Douglas or Lee Marvin, he rarely went. "I don't fit in with the handsome guys in suits," Elam once said. "If I sit at their table, they think the costume department got lost." Still, his name was never far from scandal. In 1971, the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner ran the headline "Jack Elam and the Blonde from The Intruder," hinting at an affair with actress Karen Steele. Photographer Rick Bowers even captured them leaving a Beverly Hills hotel party at midnight. Elam stayed silent, but Garner wrote, "I asked if it bothered him. He laughed and said, 'The louder they talk, the longer they remember me, Jim.' But I knew he'd go home and sit in silence for hours. Behind that laugh was a loneliness no one cared to see." By the late 1970s, as Hollywood's sexual liberation era exploded, Elam found himself the subject of a different kind of gossip. Variety hinted that he was unusually close to Lee Marvin after the two were spotted leaving a Paramount party together. In a 1978 KABC TV interview, a host even suggested Elam and Marvin seemed to share a bond that goes beyond work. No one ever confirmed it, but crew members whispered that Elam had a complicated private life. A lighting technician from the Texas across the river claimed, "I once saw Jack holding Marvin's hand backstage. They weren't hiding it, no one just dared to ask." Garner neither confirmed nor denied writing. Instead, Hollywood loves labels. "Two men walk together 3 times, they call it something else." Jack never defended himself, but I knew he was tired of the whispers. Privately, Elam married twice. His first wife, Jean Hodgert, died in 1961. Soon after, he wed Margaret Jennison, who worked at a small Los Angeles record company. In Garner's notebook, he wrote, "Jack told me he married because he thought it might change his luck. He was superstitious, believed a man with a damaged eye would suffer misfortune if he stayed single. But I knew he didn't want to. He was just afraid of being alone. Marriage was his way of pretending he still belonged to the world." Despite his hard-to-love reputation, Elam lived by an unshakable code. He hated lies, stood up for the weak, and never compromised when he felt something was wrong. In 1970, during the filming of The Cockeyed Cowboys of Calico County, a young actor was berated publicly by the director. Everyone froze except Elam, who stepped in to defend him. He was suspended for 2 weeks but refused to apologize. Garner remembered he walked off set without a word. Later, I asked if he regretted it. He said, "No, at least I still have my pride." Scandal after scandal made Jack Elam both admired and feared. But to James Garner behind it all was a man exhausted from living under constant scrutiny. They say Jack led a double life, that he had too many lovers, Garner wrote. But I think he was just looking for someone who'd stay until morning. Jack wasn't chasing love, he was running from the fear of being left. At the end of that section, Garner stopped for a page, then added a single blurred line of ink. Jack was the only person who never lied to me. From there, the notebook began to take a different turn, where the bond between the two men was no longer merely friendship, but something so deep that even Garner himself couldn't find the courage to name it. Two people so close. No one dares to ask what they are. The 1980s were a stormy period for James Garner, not just in his career, but in his personal life as well. After decades of being hailed as the last decent man in Hollywood, he suddenly became the center of a lawsuit that shook the television industry. In 1980, Garner officially sued Universal Studios, accusing the company of profit fraud over the Rockford Files, the television series that had made him a household name. At first, the press portrayed him as a hero who dared to stand up to the system. But as the lawsuit dragged on for 6 long years, Garner became a traitor, shunned by other studios. Television Confidential described it as a one-man war against all of Hollywood. Meanwhile, the Los Angeles Times published a cruel headline: James Garner, the man who doesn't know when to quit. The lawsuit left him drained both financially and emotionally. Old injuries from the Rockford Files, especially to his knee and spine, forced him into constant physical therapy at Cedars-Sinai Hospital. In his journal, Garner wrote briefly, "I thought I was fighting a studio, but it turns out I was fighting the whole city." But that wasn't all. As his career declined, his family life also began to crack. In 1983, People Weekly reported that he was living apart from his wife, Lois Clark, who had been with him since 1956. The article described Garner as a lonely man in a house too large for him. At that time, he refused all interviews, saying only through his representative, "I don't want anyone to pity me." It was then that the name Jack Elam reappeared quietly without warning. According to Garner's writings, one drizzly afternoon in November 1984, he returned to his Brentwood home after meeting his lawyer and found a man waiting by the door. It was Jack, wearing an old brown coat, holding a bottle of whiskey and a worn VHS tape of "Support Your Local Sheriff." He didn't say much. Garner wrote, "He just smiled and whispered, 'I think you'll need this more than I do.'" They sat in the living room and replayed scenes from the movie they'd made 15 years earlier. When the part came where Elam slipped and fell into a water trough, both burst out laughing. But then the mood grew quiet. Jack asked softly, "Jim, do you ever regret becoming an actor?" After a long pause, Garner replied, "No, I only regret trusting the wrong people." Jack poured another drink, smiled wearily, and said, "Well, at least you still have me." From that day on, Elam began visiting Garner frequently. Sometimes he brought snacks, sometimes just old tabloids with their pictures from the 1970s, joking, "They still haven't forgotten us, Jim." Garner wrote in his diary, "I don't know what to call Jack anymore, friend, colleague, or something more. But every time the world turned its back, he was the one who knocked on my door. Their meetings became a ritual. They watched old movies together, walked along San Vicente Boulevard, or drove to Malibu just to sit by the sea. Once a Star Weekly paparazzo snapped a photo of them sitting on a wooden pier, gazing at the ocean with the caption, "Lonely James Garner seeks comfort in old friend Jack Elam." People speculated, why did Elam, who had almost vanished from Hollywood, reappear beside Garner just when he was at his lowest? In an interview with KTTV Los Angeles, Elam simply said, "I came because my friend needed me, not because they needed a headline." Behind the spotlight, their friendship grew increasingly complex. In one long diary entry, Garner wrote that Elam appeared during the worst days of my life. He recounted how once, after collapsing from a severe back spasm, Elam was the first to help him up. He stayed the night, made me soup, and watched Bonanza with me like we used to. Garner also recalled that sometimes Elam tried to joke, but they both fell silent. One night, Jack whispered, "Jim, have you ever felt like you're living a life that doesn't belong to you?" Garner answered, "Every day." Jack smiled and said nothing more. Garner wrote that he didn't understand Jack's meaning, or perhaps I did, but didn't dare think further. Rumors began to spread. In 1986, People Weekly published an article titled, "Garner Finds His Only Ally in His War with Hollywood." Other outlets like KTTV and the National Enquirer hinted that Elam visited Garner's home so often it could hardly be a coincidence. The public began to wonder, but both men remained silent. Garner wrote in his diary, "Hollywood hates two men who are too close. They don't believe friendship can be that deep without ulterior motives. But they don't understand there are lonelinesses only someone like Jack can soothe." In May 1987, Garner and Elam left Los Angeles and drove to Santa Fe, New Mexico. They told people they were taking a few days off, but according to the diary, it was a getaway from the press and from ourselves. They rented a small cabin among pine trees with no phone, no TV. Garner wrote, "Jack made breakfast, I brewed coffee. All day there was only the sound of the wind. He said, if heaven exists, it must be as peaceful as this." On another page, almost entirely crossed out, one trembling line remained. "That night, he placed his hand on my shoulder. I didn't pull away. No one knows what truly happened. Perhaps it was a simple gesture of comfort between two lonely men, or something deeper that Garner never intended to reveal. He only added one short line. We didn't speak of it. We didn't dare. In Hollywood, loving the wrong person can destroy you. I wouldn't let it destroy him." As time went on, their relationship grew more private. Elam gradually withdrew from acting and moved to Oregon with his family. Occasionally, he still called Garner saying, "I'm baking, want me to send you some?" Garner said that every time he heard Elam's voice, he felt a little less cold in a city full of people pretending to be happy. Between two diary pages was a letter written in blue ink with no date. "You are the only person who makes me feel safe, even when the whole world is against me. If anyone asks, I'll call it friendship. But you and I both know it's more than that." By late 1989, Garner won his lawsuit against Universal, earning millions and regaining his reputation. The press called him the man who defeated Hollywood, but in his journal, he wrote only one line. "Victory means nothing if you're not here to raise a glass with me." After that victory, Garner appeared more frequently on television, but he smiled less. Friends said he grew quieter, often staring into the distance. Perhaps because, as he once wrote, Jack was the truest part of this fake Hollywood. From then on, the diary entered a new phase, the stage lights fading, leaving only hurried lines written in solitude and a love that James Garner never dared to name. A late confession, when every silence is a form of love. October 2003. Hollywood received sad news. Jack Elam passed away at his home in Ashland, Oregon at the age of 82. The news was delivered quietly, just a few lines in The Hollywood Reporter and a short obituary in the Los Angeles Times. No press conference, no public funeral. Only a few neighbors said he went peacefully in his sleep. But nearly 1,000 miles away in a small house in Brentwood, James Garner sat for hours in his car, in the pouring rain, not turning on the radio, not calling anyone. In the diary found later, he wrote, "I didn't cry. I just sat there watching the rain fall on the windshield. I remembered his voice, the jokes that made me laugh. Then I realized this time he's really gone." They said Elam went peacefully, but a few weeks before he died, he had called Garner. That was their last conversation. Garner recorded. He spoke hoarsely, weakly, saying it was snowing in Oregon. I joked, "Are you wearing sunglasses?" He laughed softly and said, "If there's a next life, I hope I'll still get to make movies with you, only next time I get to be the lead." I didn't think that was goodbye. When news of Jack Elam's death spread, the press began to dig up old scandals, tales of drinking, rumored love affairs, and even insinuations of overly close friendships with male colleagues. National Enquirer and Star Weekly ran their own stories. Journalist Paul Warner of Inside Hollywood wrote, "Jack Elam didn't fit into any mold. He lived by instinct without needing the audience to understand." Those words pulled Garner back into the storm. Once again, the papers called his name, asking why Elam's best friend didn't attend the funeral. On the Classic Western Fans Forum, a user claiming to be a former crew member of Support Your Local Sheriff wrote, "Garner should have been there. No one was closer to Elam than he was." But Garner didn't go. In his notebook, he explained, "Jack once told me, 'If I die first, don't come to the funeral. I don't want you to see me lying still. I want you to remember me when I'm still swearing.'" I promised him, and I kept that promise. He only sent a white wreath to the Litwiller Simonson Funeral Home in Oregon with a handwritten card that simply read, "I never forgot you." The florist told the Mail Tribune he was paid in cash with no sender's name. It wasn't until many years later, when Garner's notebook was published, that people recognized the slanted handwriting as his. After that funeral, James Garner almost completely withdrew from television. He turned down many offers, appearing only sporadically in small projects like Space Cowboys 2000 or The Notebook 2004. When asked about Elam, he always dodged the question. In a CBS Sunday morning interview, when asked, "Do you ever miss Jack Elam?" Garner gave a faint smile every time I turn on the TV. Yet in his diary, the entries from 2003 onward were filled with lines dedicated to his departed friend. No longer notes about filming schedules or contracts, but deeply personal reflections. I used to think I was strong, but every time I watch Support Your Local Sheriff, I hear his voice in my head. Jack wasn't just part of my career, he was part of me. According to film scholar Linda Trowbridge, University of Southern California, this was the most subtle confession Garner ever wrote, one that doesn't need to be said out loud for readers to understand. She added, "They didn't need words, just silence." And in Hollywood's noisy world, silence was the rarest truth. In the years that followed, Garner lived quietly. Neighbors said he often sat on his porch at sunset watching the sky. A close friend actor, John Voight, recalled in a eulogy I once visited him and saw him sitting alone with a glass of whiskey. I asked what he was thinking about, and he just said, "I'm listening to a voice I haven't heard in a long time." Garner's daughter, Gigi Garner, later shared in an interview with ABC News, "My dad rarely talked about emotions, but whenever Jack's name came up, he became a different person. He once told me, You know there are people who pass through your life, they don't have to say anything. Just being there is enough. I knew who he meant. As he aged, Garner's health visibly declined. In 2008, he suffered a mild stroke and was treated at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. Though he recovered, walking became difficult and his memory faded. But according to his nurse, he always carried a small photo in his wallet, one of him and Jack Elam on the Support Your Local Sheriff set in 1969, both grinning under the Arizona sun. An article in the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner in 2010 titled, "Garner, the Last Gentleman of the West" by Michael Dempsey noted, "When I asked why he still kept that photo, Garner simply said, 'Because that's the only moment Hollywood ever felt real to me.'" In 2011, in a rare ABC News interview, he was asked, "Is there anything you wish you'd said to someone?" Garner hesitated for a moment, then softly replied, "There's someone I still owe a goodbye." The host smiled, thinking he meant an old colleague. But those who knew the story of Garner and Elam understood it wasn't an empty phrase. In his diary, the final line written in black ink, perhaps just weeks before his death in July 2014, read briefly, "I'm coming home, Jack. I hope that place is brave enough for us not to be silent anymore." James Garner passed away in his sleep aged 86 in the very house where he had once sat through the rain in 2003. The cause was announced as heart failure due to old age. When the news spread, CNN, NBC News, and The Guardian all hailed him as a screen hero, Hollywood's last true gentleman. But none mentioned Jack Elam's name. According to his daughter Gigi, before his death, Garner requested no large funeral. He only wished part of his ashes be scattered in Santa Fe, where he and Elam had once escaped from Hollywood in 1987. She said, "I asked him why Santa Fe. He said, 'Because that's the last place I ever felt at peace.'" No one knows if he truly believed in an afterlife, but his journal ended with that final line, a simple farewell that needed no explanation. In a Hollywood full of noise and pretense, perhaps only those two men ever understood what it meant to love without words. The silence between them in the end became the most genuine feeling of all, the kind of love without a name, but as enduring as the rain that once fell softly on the Brentwood windshield, where one man sat for hours remembering another. Now that the diary has been made public, the final pages of James Garner's life are not only a farewell to Jack Elam, but also a fragment of memory about a kind of affection that transcended the boundaries of its time. It may have been friendship, or perhaps something deeper, but without doubt it was what made a man who once walked through Hollywood's spotlight still ache until the end of his days. In a world where everything is performed, Garner was at his most genuine when he wrote about the one person he could never pretend with. This story not only moves fans to tears, but also raises a question. How many relationships in Hollywood have been buried under fear and prejudice just like that of Garner and Elam? If you too are curious about the unseen corners behind the legends of the silver screen, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment below to share your thoughts.